In a bid to be an absolute idiot like the folks of old, I'm working to build a super audience. I'm selecting the best of the best to grow the skeptic community with only the best viewers, which is obviously you right now because, duh, you're here. And you're going to watch another 3 skeptic videos after this, right? Evolution leads to eugenics, apparently, and because eugenics is we're all going to die thanks to evolution. Creationists do say some ridiculous things. Hello, I'm the Skeptic, the British floating circle that watches people make extraordinary claims, and then I explain why I don't accept what they're saying. The way humans lived in the mid-1800s determines how we live today, apparently, and so some very shitty ideas that people came up with, predominantly selective human breeding, means that evolution is dangerous and we should stop it, or at least stop accepting it. That's pretty much what the folks at the Institute for Creation Research are saying. That's right, more folks that think there's a way to use science to prove scripture. But before we find out why bad ideas from the past means evolution's a lie, if this isn't your first skeptic video, hit the like, the subscribe and the bell to get more videos like this in your feed. And a super thanks to those that hit super thanks in some recent videos. Unfriendly Atheist, Will Joker and Lark Latroy. Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe bestows leaves upon you all. More hen. Well, so let's find out how evolution leads to a very terrible society.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to the Creation Podcast, the show where we discuss the science that confirms Scripture. I have with me today ICR's president, Dr. Randy Galuza. Thank you so much for being here, Dr. G.
Thank you very much.
I love it when creationists get doctors and professors on to give some credibility. But on further inspection, it turns out that Dr. Randy is a doctor of medicine and has a BA in theology at the Moody Bible Institute. Now, I could be wrong, but surely just saying you believe the Bible is true will get you a BA in theology at that place. Also, take note here, he gives humorous scientific talks. Well, thank goodness, I need a good laugh whilst learning some stuff about how the Bible and science fit together.
We're going to talk about everybody's favorite topic. That's kind of a joke. It's actually a pretty dark topic, but it's important. It's something that we need to discuss, and that is eugenics. So from my limited knowledge of the grand scheme of science, I know that eugenics was kind of a big deal in the last century or so. I know that it was a big deal in the West. I know that I've heard things about it in like World War II and around those times also.
Oh, great. This is definitely going to go down the route of this is bad, so science is bad, right?
Can you explain to me what eugenics is?
Well, first, you're really blessed in a way to actually know something about it at this day and age. When I was your age and through high school and college, nobody ever talked about eugenics. It wasn't in American history classes. It wasn't in my high school classes, and nobody even discussed it. It was like a topic that had been completely buried or almost expunged.
So the doctor was in high school in the mid-70s, right? Since he's about mid-60s now, him not learning about idiots trying to make a superhuman species is a problem with the education system, or just him forgetting and not paying attention at the time. But perhaps schools were just too busy trying to convince folks that the story of Noah was true.
From U.S. history, and just recently with a lot of the honesty about slavery in the United States and our shameful past in relationship to that people have brought up our shameful past in relationship to eugenics, so that you actually know what the topic is, when I hadn't even heard about it really until just about a decade ago when I was on staff with ICR and started actually studying what it was and how it came about. And as you mentioned, it took off in Western civilization, particularly led, surprisingly, not by Germany, but by Great Britain and the United States. In fact, it was really the United States which was the leading proponent of eugenics at the time. And so people are probably wondering, well, what in the world is eugenics? Well, it was a major movement that started in Great Britain out of evolutionary thinking by a cousin of Charles Darwin's, whose name was Francis Galton. And it was the quest to improve humanity, as the name implies. You, meaning good, genics meaning genes,
I just want to dive in here and ask when the humorous delivery is going to start, Randy boy.
or good genes. It was trying to get good genes into humanity by selectively breeding the best of human stock and eliminating inferior people through abortion, through euthanasia for the older ones, and through selective sterilization of people that were deemed less fit than others.
Absolutely horrific means. I know for sure I'd be one of those folks that didn't make it because I lack the smarts to pass on. Thank goodness folks realised how stupid all that was, and we'll learn to never behave like that again as a society.
That's really horrible, which it makes sense that we would kind of try to want to hide that from our history, kind of unfortunately, that we participated in as a country and Great Britain participated in as a country. But I gather that it didn't just come out of nowhere. It's not like all of a sudden we're like, well, this is exactly how it's going to be. So where did this idea come from? Where did the roots of the eugenics movement begin?
Wait for it. They're going to blame evolution. I can feel it in my vibrating circumference.
You're right. It didn't just pop up overnight. It was born in many ways from Darwinian thinking, of Darwin's view of the world. And Darwin ushered in a worldview, and that worldview was called selectionism.
Darwin didn't usher in a worldview. He pointed out things that were happening and found ways of explaining it. That's not a worldview. It's just science. Now, folks taking that and using it to their advantage is wrong, but it doesn't change the fact that a natural process exists.
And if you read, actually, the last 2 pages in Darwin's most influential work, which was on the origin of species, he lays out his worldview. In fact, he says that there's a grandeur to this view in life. And the grandeur of this view of life was that through the struggle to survive, through extinction of many inferior types of creatures over very long periods of time, that led to the diversity of life on Earth, culminating in humanity as he saw it over that time. So through the struggle to survive and death and extinction, you end up with an upward trajectory to all of life on Earth and humanity, which was not a direct creation by God, obviously, but a result of a long evolutionary process. And that worldview, which he says is very grand, is called selectionism, because Darwin invented the term and really the entire concept of natural selection.
Oh, I had to go and read the last 2 pages, so thanks for that, Randy, you hilarious bugger. The last few pages mostly say that this explanation makes more sense than the creator.
And so that's a very death-driven process.
Yes.
Correct?
Oh, correct. Yeah. It's totally death-driven process. Nobody can separate death from natural selection, because Darwin integrated the whole idea of the struggle to survive from a British philosopher named Malthus, who believed that in any generation there would be more people born than resources available for them, and therefore they had to struggle for those resources, and the weak ones would die out and would be eliminated, leaving only the best. And Darwin incorporated this idea into his concept of natural selection.
And the difference is, someone deciding to wipe out part of a species because they're not deemed worthy is terrible. But nature not being able to support a species, and so the species adapts to make it work, is just a process.
That's why it was so powerful in influencing the way people thought of the arrival of humanity, and therefore then the betterment of humanity over that time. So it was a worldview which was born by Darwinism, and basically took hold in the social realm.
I'm not really sure what Darwinism even is. No one worships Darwin. They just accept what he noticed and explained, because it made sense. I'm not entirely sure how adding ism to the ends of people's names has caught on. It's stupid and doesn't change what can be demonstrated.
And actually fueled the social realm, though to be accurate, social Darwinism, even though it wouldn't have been called Darwinism, but that social type of thinking of competition and elimination of the weak pre-existed Darwin's concept of natural selection. He just really gave it a lot of credibility, scientific credibility.
What he did was point out that beneficial traits were the ones that were passed on.
All right. Well, without digging too deep into eugenics itself, I think it would benefit us and the viewers and listeners to just kind of talk about the kinds of things that may have occurred during that time. And so for anyone who doesn't want to hear about this, just be warned, we're talking about eugenics. This is not going to be a happy subject, but I think that it is important to talk about these things.
Oh, I wouldn't worry about that so much. I'm guessing your target audience is other believers in creation, so essentially followers of the Bible. There's tons of non-happy things in there. Hating ugly people in Leviticus 21:17-24, killing Egyptian babies in Numbers 16:41-49, and killing Onan for not procreating in Genesis 38:1-10. The more you look at it, it seems like the God has its own version of eugenics going on.
So you said that it is the quest to improve humanity. And so, at least from my perspective, from being a creationist, I know that humanity is not getting better, at least biologically. Generation to generation, we have more mutations. There's sickness and death. And sure, we have a lot of medicine and technology gets better. But how are they trying to improve, I guess, the genome, the survivability, the fittest of humanity? How did they try to do that? What were they doing?
You are kidding, right? It is improving. If you look at the averages, in just over 100 years, we've gone from a life expectancy of 46 for men and 48 for women to 76 for men and 81 for women. And if there really are mutations ruining humanity, why aren't you blaming your God for it happening?
Well, they're trying to, in the really big picture, control the evolution of humanity. It was like human intervention in the evolution of humanity. In fact, the Second International Conference on Eugenics basically defined eugenics as the self-directed control of human evolution.
Okay.
So they're trying to do that.
Doing it instead of nature?
Instead of nature
Okay.
doing it, of course, yeah. Instead of nature doing it, we're going to try to replicate what nature is doing. And there's multiple facets to it. One, there was the view that modern medicine was a threat to human evolution, that because medicine could now intervene at earlier stages, it could save people and was saving people that normally would have died. And it was saving them to the point where they would actually develop and go on to their reproductive years and then reproduce. It also was viewed in society as developing a tolerance for people who normally shouldn't reproduce. In this particular case, it would have been people who would have been considered to be mentally unfit, that at other times would have been eliminated in some way and would not have been able to reproduce, but this care, welfare, humanity, and other interventions was allowing them to not only live, but kind of like nurturing them along to where they could actually reproduce. And the fear was that they would then reproduce mentally unfit themselves.
And then some folks decided to do something about it. And that was bloody ridiculous.
Another aspect of it is what would be called positive eugenics, where it's almost like what you would do with cattle. You take your best cows, you take your best bulls from your herd, you breed them together, and you're selecting for positive traits in which you would try to breed into it, which in a way is also kind of, even though it's called positive, it has this kind of seedy side to it where you're like trying to pick who's the best and encouraging them to breed. And in certain societies, they didn't even take people who loved each other. They were just trying to select for the best genes. So it isn't fully positive. And then, of course, then there's the negative eugenics, which was the part that really raised the biggest outcry, and that was forced sterilizations.
Yeah, it's bloody awful. But get to the point of why this means evolution's wrong and you should now believe that a god did it.
Government mandated sterilizations of people who were deemed unfit.
And this happened in the U.S.?
Oh, yes.
Okay.
Happened in the U.S., happened in Great Britain. And, of course, it happened in the Scandinavian countries as well, in Germany. Happened all over Western society, in many ways led by the United States. Abortion, even before there was Roe v. Wade, there was abortion in this country, and then euthanasia, of which all of these haven't really left society by any means, and in fact are even increasing today.
Mm-hmm.
But not all of that is to do with creating a super species. Abortion is healthcare. My wife had to have one or else she would have died a year ago. And where have people recently been getting euthanized because they shouldn't be procreating?
So I have something written down here in my notes, and it said that you mentioned like medicine was kind of ruining the process of natural selection. I have here that it's like civilization in its entirety is ruined the process of natural selection, and eugenics must replace it. To me, that seems like society and civilization is what makes us human in the first place. Like, that doesn't ruin anything. That is us. I mean, right? Does that not?
Right. That's what makes us civilized. That's what makes us different than animals.
Right.
Is the fact that all of us were created in the image of God, and we have this sense, almost this innate sense of the value of other human beings.
But didn't your God also create the other things too? Like all the animals, the ones that would kill the ones made in its image. And humans are not the only animals that look out for each other. Dolphins, chimps, wolves, ants, bees all have complex social structures where they look out for their own.
Of course, your conscience can be overridden.
Mm-hmm.
It can be poisoned to where you no longer see that. But I think you're referring to a quote, and I'll just read it because
Sure.
It is so valuable. It's from a man named Carl Pearson. Now, Carl Pearson, let me just give a little bit of background on him. Carl Pearson was a British biostatistician. And in many ways, he did a lot of good things. When I was at Harvard getting my master's in public health, and I was taking courses in biostats, I used many equations by Carl Pearson. In fact, they're just called Pearson equations in many ways. And I was unaware of this other side of him, that he was such an advocate back at the turn of the last century for eugenics. I was always thinking it was Francis Galton, who was the cousin of Charles Darwin. But Pearson, in many ways, was a leader of this movement and influenced in the United States as well. And this was an interesting quote that he had, and he actually had two. I have two, one from 1920s and one from 1912.
Long time ago.
And I'll read the 1921 first because it kind of gives an overview. By this time, he had developed his thoughts a little bit better.
For someone so hilarious, he doesn't half drone on.
Medicine is a problem in this regard.
That's right. He saw that as a problem, and he said, this quote goes on, he says of these physicians later on, now, if you take natural selection as your worldview, and I'm paraphrasing him here, but that's what he says to them, then you must put into practice, medical doctors, you must put into practice that you believe in natural selection.
Did he just say that if you believe in natural selection, then you have to believe in natural selection? Yeah, no shit, mate.
What he's saying then is what?
They have to choose between life and death for these people.
That's right.
Yeah. Wow. It's really scummy.
It is scummy. So people who have put their trust in medical doctors for their well-being and care can't trust them, because these medical doctors are not their patients' advocates. They're the advocates for humanity. They're the advocates for human evolution.
I'm not even sure what his point is here. Is he saying that doctors only treat people for the survival of humans rather than the individual they're treating?
And that's what he's calling on them to be.
As a medical doctor, how does that make you feel?
It makes me feel like a traitor.
Okay.
It would make me feel like a complete traitor to my patients on that, where if anybody is going to be their advocate, if anybody is going to stand up for their patient, and that's what my job was as a medical doctor, to fight for them, to argue for them, to do everything I can to get the resources they need to get better, not just apply medical skills, but to basically be in their corner with them. And that's what real medical doctors are supposed to do, is to be on their patient's side. That now I have a divided interest, and I am supposedly put the best interests of humanity and my worldview of natural selection into effect, and in essence, not do my best for them, or worse, do things to hasten their demise.
Does he think that non-religious evolution-believing doctors shouldn't have treated people so that only the strong survive? What a jerk!
Wow. Okay, so we know that this is really gross. Eugenics is immoral, distasteful, but it's not, at least to the extent that it was, it's not in practice to that extent anymore. I mean, we don't have like marriage registries or anything like that for like choosing a fit mate, at least as far as I know. But so it's fallen out of practice.
Thank goodness. And that's not because of religion. They say many words without actually getting to the point we all know they're trying to. So I'm going to skip ahead a lot.
My mom was, they recommended her to abort me in the early 90s. They said that I had lots of issues, and I was a little premature. I don't have any major issues that I know of.
No.
But she was like, absolutely not. This child's made in the image of God, and if he's got issues, he's got issues. But, but even in the 90s, they were right. They recommended that. So.
That's right. Exactly. And that is the creep of selectionist thinking, which ends up devaluing, all the way going back all the way to eugenics, human beings.
We're human beings. We're made in the image of God. There's, we're not animals. They're treating us like animals,
Did they say you should, or did they say you may not choose this life for your child, so we're giving you the option? They're very different. And if you were made in the image of a god, does that god also have the health issues the doctors were worried about? And treating like animals, at least if animals are struggling, they get to be put out of their misery humanely.
Almost. And it just makes me, I think about some of the language that's used in the eugenics movement, and it's just very uncomfortable.
Thank goodness it's not allowed anymore.
But I'm glad that we talked about it. Thank you for talking about it with me. Do you have any closing thoughts before we draw this to a close?
Well, sure.
Yeah.
One, just as a follow-up for couples, you need to find good counselors. You'll get good doctors, and there's value of prenatal testing, and there's value of prenatal care and all those things, but you need to find doctors you can trust. Two, you need to rely on the Bible.
Yes.
And what the Bible tells you about that child that the Lord allowed you to conceive.
So ignore what the genetics tests say, and if your child may not survive long after birth, do what the Bible says and have it anyway, because some undemonstrated sky wizard let you be pregnant in the first place. What terrible advice.
And go forward on that. If you don't rely on the Bible, you will not have real informed consent.
Yeah.
And you rely on this biased information.
And there we go. All that to just say, you got pregnant, you better have it because the Bible says you should.
And then three, even as creationists, we need to watch the creep of selectionist thinking even into our mindset. So often I will hear someone say like, well, natural selection is just a conservative process. It's not a constructive process.
Whatever you think it is, it's just an explanation of what happens in nature. I'm almost sure that they think that natural selection is someone picking what mates with what. They're getting it very confused with selective breeding. But that's only in domesticated animals. Eugenics in the Western world is pretty much non-existent.
And I said, well, explain what you mean by that. Well, they'll say, well, natural selection is basically a God-ordained process to help people live in a fallen world where nature eliminates the weak and eliminates those defective genes from the population.
Yeah, no, that's not what natural selection is, mate. And if you've got that wrong, then we can't really continue, can we? Nature doesn't eliminate in the way you're trying to strawman it does. The least favourable genes don't get passed on because they're not beneficial, and the host is less likely to reproduce because said gene doesn't offer any advantage to its existence. But it takes a long time for that to happen.
And therefore, it really preserves and conserves the population, the genetic health of the population as a whole for the benefit of everybody else.
But that's not the same as people saying, I only want blonde-haired, blue-eyed superhumans. And trying to make out it is very dishonest. But thank you for showing how little you understand about natural selection in nature, confusing it with selective breeding, and then trying to make out that this still happens in the Western world. I'm not sure if they were trying to make out if eugenics was still popular in today's society, but it's an important thing to listen to. It's just a shame they have no idea what natural selection really is. And I didn't even mention the one true cosmic deity, Lisa the Rainbow Giraffe, leafly upon her. Thankfully, she doesn't need to be spoken about to bestow leaves upon you, unless it's after a super thanks. Do you think eugenics is still around in today's society? Let me know in the section below. I'm going to skeptic this as one big creationist mix-up. A big thank you to this month's top-level ticks on Patreon. Godless Granny, Addy Rockhart, The Enixes, Jakari, Elizabeth, Whiskey Tech Fred, Rick and Travis, as well as all the $3 base ticks. You can become a supporter on Patreon too at patreon.com/theskeptic. The link is in the description, along with links to all my other socials. Don't forget to hit the like button and subscribe if you haven't already. From me, the Skeptic, stay safe, keep thinking logically, and ask questions. Skepticism is the first step towards truth. See you next Saturday.